The hotel ballroom shimmered under soft golden lights. Music played faintly from a speaker, while waiters rushed around setting tables, filling glasses, and making sure every detail looked perfect. Among them was a young woman who moved quietly, almost invisible in the crowd. Her uniform was neat but old, her shoes slightly worn from long hours on her feet. She smiled politely at guests, carried trays with care, and made sure no one ever saw how tired she really was. Her name was Lena. She worked double shifts almost every day, often skipping meals to save money. She didn't complain much. She needed the job. Her rent was due soon, and her younger brother was still in school. Every coin mattered. Still, every time she walked past the corner of the ballroom where the grand piano stood, something inside her stirred. It had been years since she last touched piano keys. The sight of it always reminded her of another life, one she had almost forgotten. When Lena was a little girl, her father used to fix old instruments in their small town. He would bring home broken pianos, violins, or guitars that people no longer wanted. Lena would sit next to him, watching as he repaired them. When he wasn't looking, she would press a few keys and listen carefully. The piano had always fascinated her. It was the first thing that made her feel alive. Her father noticed her love for music, and whenever he could, he taught her a little. They didn't have money for lessons, but Lena learned by ear. She practiced every night until her fingers hurt, but life changed quickly. Her father passed away when she was 15, and soon after, her family faced hard times. Her mother fell sick and bills piled up. Lena had to leave school to work. The piano lesson stopped, and so did her dream. Music faded into the background as survival became the only goal. Now, years later, she was here, serving guests who lived in the world she once dreamed of. Every weekend, the hotel hosted events for rich clients. There were charity dinners, business parties, and fashion shows. The same kind of people came every time, dressed in shiny clothes, laughing loudly, talking about things Lena could never afford to imagine. But she never judged them. She simply worked quietly, doing her part. That evening, a charity gala was being held for an art foundation. The ballroom looked stunning. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars, and the tables were decorated with flowers that smelled sweet and fresh. A live pianist played soft classical music in the corner, creating a calm atmosphere. Guests chatted, laughed, and sipped champagne. Lena carried a tray of glasses around the table, smiling when people glanced her way, even though most didn't notice her at all. As she walked past the piano, she slowed down for just a second. Her eyes softened as she listened to the melody. Her heart seemed to follow every note. She knew this piece, and she had learned it years ago by memory. Her fingers twitched slightly as if they wanted to play along. She wished just for a moment that she could sit down and feel the keys again. But wishes didn't pay rent, and dreams didn't fill empty plates. She took a quiet breath and went back to work. In the kitchen, the other waiters were talking about the guests. Some laughed about how picky they were. Others complained about the long night ahead. Lena just smiled faintly and kept working. She was used to being silent. Words took energy, and she had little left to spare. But deep down, she carried something that no one there could see, a small flame that refused to die. Every night after work, she would go home, take out a small keyboard she had saved from a thrift shop, and play softly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that she still had music inside her. Hours passed. The event continued smoothly. Guests ate, clapped, and laughed. The pianist played gracefully through the evening. Lena kept serving food and refilling glasses, her feet aching but her expression calm. It was nearly the end of her shift when she noticed something unusual. The pianist suddenly stopped playing mid-song. His hands froze and he looked pale. A few guests turned their heads. Moments later, the man stood up and hurried away, holding his chest as if in pain. The room filled with low murmurs. The hotel manager rushed over, whispering to the staff to find someone to replace him quickly. Lena stood near the back, watching the commotion. The manager looked stressed, trying to call another musician, but no one was answering. The guests were growing restless. Without music, the atmosphere started to lose its charm. Someone joked that they could play something from their phone, and the crowd laughed awkwardly. Lena hesitated. Her heart began to race. She wanted to help, but the thought scared her. She wasn't supposed to stand out. Waitresses weren't meant to take the stage. But something inside her whispered that this was her moment. Still, she couldn't bring herself to speak. The manager sighed loudly and muttered, This can't happen at a charity event. We need anyone who can play even a little. Before she realized it, Lena stepped forward. Her voice came out quietly but firm. I can play a little, she said. The manager turned, surprised. You? He asked, eyebrows raised. He looked at her uniform, not believing what he'd heard. Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Just until you find someone else, he hesitated. We don't have time for experiments, he murmured. But he saw the restless faces of the guests and finally nodded. Fine, he said. Just play something simple, okay? Don't make it worse, Lena nodded. Her palms were sweating, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. As she walked toward the piano, she felt every eye in the room on her. Some guests whispered to each other, curious about what the waitress was doing. Others looked amused. She tried not to notice. Her hands trembled as she sat on the piano bench. The seat felt familiar yet foreign, like meeting an old friend after years apart. She closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The moment she touched them, something inside her shifted. The sound of the keys under her fingertips felt like home. At first, the notes came out shaky. Her nerves made her hands stiff, but after a few seconds, her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. The melody began to flow, gentle and clear. Conversation stopped. The room grew quiet. Even the clinking of glasses faded away. The guests turned toward her, surprised. Lena forgot where she was. The music carried her somewhere else, back to her childhood, to her father's workshop, to the evenings when life felt simple. She poured every emotion she had into the melody, her struggles, her hopes, her quiet dreams. The song grew stronger, deeper, more alive. The guests could feel it. The tune wasn't perfect, but it was full of heart. When she finally finished, the last note lingered in the air. For a moment, there was complete silence. Lena lowered her hands, her chest rising and falling. She didn't dare look up. Then suddenly a sound broke the stillness, when a single clap, then another and another. Soon the entire room erupted in applause. The guests stood, clapping and cheering. Some smiled, some looked emotional. The manager's mouth fell open. He hadn't expected this. Lena stood slowly, unsure what to do. Her face flushed red as the applause continued. She gave a small nod and stepped away from the piano. The manager came over, still speechless. Where did you learn to play like that? He asked softly. She smiled faintly. Just at home, she said. I used to love it. He stared at her for a moment, then smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. You just saved the night, he said quietly. As Lena returned to the kitchen, her coworkers stared at her with wide eyes. One of them whispered, I had no idea you could play like that. She just smiled and said nothing. Inside, her heart felt light. For the first time in years, she wasn't just the quiet waitress in the background. She was someone who had made people feel something. Later that night, as she walked home under the streetlights, she couldn't stop smiling. The air felt different. Her steps were lighter. She replayed the sound of the applause in her mind, not because it made her proud, but because it reminded her of who she really was. She had almost forgotten that version of herself, the one who loved music more than anything. At her small apartment, she placed her tray and uniform aside, sat in front of her old keyboard and began to play softly. The notes filled the room, warm and gentle. She knew her life hadn't changed overnight, but something inside her had. For the first time in a long time, she believed again that maybe her dreams weren't as far away as they once seemed. The next morning, Lena woke up earlier than usual. Her small apartment was quiet, the faint light of dawn slipping through the curtains. She sat on the edge of her bed for a while, still thinking about the night before. The sound of the applause, the looks on people's faces, the feeling of her fingers on real piano keys, it all played over and over in her mind like a dream she didn't want to end. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She had done something that reminded her who she really was. But as soon as that thought made her smile, another one followed. Maybe the hotel manager would think she overstepped her job. Maybe she shouldn't have touched the piano. Maybe she had caused trouble. Her heart sank a little at the thought. She couldn't afford to lose her job. She took a quick shower, tied her hair neatly, and wore her uniform again. The mirror showed a tired face, but there was a soft glow in her eyes. Something inside her had changed, even if she couldn't explain it. She grabbed her small bag and hurried out the door. When she arrived at the hotel, the staff was already busy cleaning after the big event. Decorations were being taken down, tables cleared, and leftover food packed away. The same manager from last night was standing near the front desk, talking to someone. Lena hesitated before walking toward him. She took a deep breath. "Good morning," she said softly. He looked at her, and for a moment she couldn't read his expression. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Morning, Lena," he said. "You played really well last night. I didn't know we had a pianist hiding among us." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I just wanted to help." He waved his hand. "You didn't cross anything. You saved the night. People couldn't stop talking about it. A few guests even asked about you after the event." She blinked, surprised. "They did?" He nodded. "Yeah, one of them was a music producer, actually. He said he hadn't heard someone play with that much feeling in a long time. I didn't have your number, so I told him I'd ask you first." Lena froze. "A producer?" She repeated. The manager nodded again. He left his card. "Said you should call if you're interested." He handed her a small white business card. She stared at it for a moment, her hands trembling slightly. The name printed on it didn't mean much to her, but the idea of calling someone like that made her nervous. She tucked the card into her pocket carefully. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," the manager said with a grin. "Just remember us when you become famous." Lena laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't think that will happen." The rest of the day went by slowly. Every time she reached into her pocket, she felt the edge of that card. She couldn't stop thinking about it. After her shift ended, she sat on a bench outside the hotel. The evening breeze felt cool against her skin. She took out the card again and stared at it. The idea of calling scared her. What would she even say? She wasn't trained, didn't have any background in music schools, and she had no recordings of her own. She was just a waitress who loved to play piano. She sighed and slipped the card back into her bag. Maybe tomorrow, she thought. Tonight she'd go home and play her old keyboard again. But the next day, when she returned to work, something unexpected happened. As she walked in, a few of her coworkers clapped playfully. One of them said, "Look who's famous now." Another joked, "You better not quit when you get rich." Lena laughed nervously, her cheeks turning red. "Stop it," she said. "I'm not famous," but one of the waiters pulled out his phone and showed her something. There it was, a video from the event posted online. Someone had recorded her performance and shared it. The video already had thousands of views. The caption read, "Waitress shocks crowd with piano performance at luxury gala." She couldn't believe it. Her hands went cold as she watched herself play. The comments were full of kind words. People were amazed that someone working as a waitress could play with such emotion. Lena didn't know what to feel. Happy, scared, confused, everything all at once. The manager came over with a smile. "Looks like you're going viral," he said. "I told you people loved it." For the next few days, the hotel became busier than usual. Some guests even recognized her. A few asked her to play again, but she politely declined, too shy to do it on demand. She still had work to do. But at night, when she got home, she couldn't help but read the comments again and again. Each message felt like a small spark, reminding her that maybe people did care about real music, not just fancy names. One evening, she finally decided to call the number on the card. Her hands were shaking as she dialed. A deep voice answered. "Hello? Hi," she said softly. "My name's Lena. I work at the Grandview Hotel. You left your card after the event." The voice brightened immediately. "Ah, yes. The waitress who played the piano. I've been hoping you'd call." She smiled nervously. "I just wanted to thank you for your kind words." He laughed. "Kind words? You have real talent, Lena. You play from the heart." "I meant it. If you're interested, I'd like to meet and talk." "No pressure, of course," she hesitated. "I don't have formal training," she admitted. "I just learned by myself." "That's fine," he said warmly. "Sometimes the best musicians are the ones who don't follow rules. They just feel the music. Let's meet for coffee this weekend, if that's okay with you." After a pause, she said softly, "All right." When she hung up, her heart wouldn't stop racing. She sat in silence for a while, the phone still in her hand. Part of her was terrified. The other part couldn't stop smiling. She didn't know what would come from this, but something inside her told her to take the chance. Saturday arrived faster than she expected. She chose her simplest dress, one she hadn't worn in a long time, and tied her hair neatly. The cafe was small and quiet, with the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. She spotted the man from the event right away. He stood up when he saw her and smiled warmly. "Lena, it's good to finally meet you properly," he said, offering a handshake. They sat down, and he asked about her life, her music, and how she learned to play. She told him everything, about her father, about how she used to practice on an old keyboard, about working at the hotel. He listened carefully, nodding often. After a while, he leaned forward and said, "You know, talent like yours deserves to be shared. I work with a few small music studios. Nothing big, but they'd love to record you, even just one song." Her eyes widened. "Me? Record?" He smiled. "Yes, you. You don't need to be famous to start. All you need is courage. I can help you with the rest." Lena hesitated, twisting her fingers nervously. "I don't have money for studio time." He shook his head. "Don't worry about that. I'll arrange it. Think of it as an opportunity, not a deal. Just your music, the way you feel it." She looked down, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he said kindly, and that's exactly what she did. For the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every break at work, every quiet moment at home, her mind kept returning to that offer. She even dreamed about it. In her dreams, she was on stage playing for people who listened with their hearts, not their wallets. Finally, one night, she decided. She sent a short message. "I'd like to try." The reply came quickly. "Perfect. Let's make it happen." The next week, Lena found herself standing in a small studio surrounded by microphones, wires, and a glossy black piano. She sat down, her heart pounding just like it had that night at the hotel. The producer smiled through the glass window and gave her a thumbs up. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Lena closed her eyes. For a moment, she forgot the studio, the equipment, everything. She thought about her father, her family, the long nights working at the hotel. Then she began to play. The sound was pure, full of emotion, each note carrying a piece of her story. The room filled with something unexplainable, not just music, but feeling. When she finished, the producer stepped inside, his eyes shining. "That," he said softly, "was beautiful." Lena smiled, her heart full. She didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The day after her first recording, Lena woke up with a mix of excitement and fear. She could hardly believe what had happened. The night before, she had sat at a piano in a real studio, surrounded by microphones and professionals, and played her heart out. It felt like something out of a dream. But now, as sunlight filled her small apartment, doubt slowly crept in. What if it wasn't good enough? What if the producer just said nice things to be polite? The thought made her stomach twist. She got ready for work, trying not to overthink. Her uniform felt heavier than usual, and when she tied her apron, she paused for a moment, looking at her reflection. "Just keep going," she whispered to herself. One day at a time. When she reached the hotel, everything seemed normal at first. The smell of coffee, the sound of guests chatting, and the soft background music all made the day feel like any other. But soon she noticed something different. People were looking at her, not in a rude way, but with curious smiles. One of her coworkers waved her over, grinning. "Lena, you're on the news." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked. He showed her a video on his phone. It was her again, the same performance from the gala, but this time it was on a local TV segment. The host was talking about a hidden talent discovered in the most unexpected place. Her name was mentioned, her story briefly told. Lena's face turned red as she watched it. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. By lunchtime, even guests were talking about her. One woman stopped her near a table and said, "You played beautifully, dear. You have a gift." Lena thanked her politely, feeling both proud and shy. All the attention felt strange. She wasn't used to being noticed. Later that day, she got a call from the producer. "I just wanted to tell you," he said excitedly, "that the studio loved your recording. We'd like to release it online. It might be small at first, but people will hear it." Lena's breath caught. "Release it like for everyone?" "Yes," he said. "It's your music, your story. I'll take care of the technical side. You just need to say yes." Her hands trembled slightly. It all felt unreal. After a short pause, she whispered, "Yes, thank you." That night, she sat on her small couch staring at her phone. Her song was live. The title simply said, "The Waitress Who Played from the Heart." She pressed play, and as the familiar notes filled the room, tears welled in her eyes. This was her. Not the tired worker who served tables, not the girl who had given up her dreams, but the real her, the one she had hidden away for too long. Days passed, and something unexpected started happening. People began sharing her music. Comments appeared from all over. Strangers writing about how the song made them cry, how it reminded them of their own forgotten dreams. Some said they listened to it on repeat because it gave them peace. Lena read every message, unable to believe that her little piece of music could touch so many hearts. Her life slowly began to change. The hotel manager, who once saw her only as an employee, now treated her with quiet pride. "You're bringing good attention to this place," he said one morning. "We're lucky to have you." But even with all the attention, Lena stayed humble. She still cleaned tables, carried trays, and smiled at guests just like before. Music had given her hope, but she knew that fame wasn't what mattered. It was the chance to do what she loved. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, the producer walked into the hotel. He waved to her from across the lobby, smiling. "We need to talk," he said. "There's something exciting coming." They sat down at an empty table. "Do you remember the gala you played at?" he asked. "Of course," she said, smiling. "Well," he continued, "one of the people there is organizing a charity concert next month. A big one. They want you to perform, on stage in front of hundreds of guests." Lena froze. "Me?" she said, her eyes wide. "But I'm not a performer. I've never done anything like that." He nodded gently. "I know. But they specifically asked for you. They saw your video and said your story moved them. They want something real, not just another famous musician. Think about it. You don't have to say yes now." Lena stared at the table, her mind spinning. The idea of performing in front of so many people terrified her. She could barely handle playing in front of the hotel guests that one night. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "You can do this." That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept imagining the stage, the lights, the crowd. Fear mixed with excitement until she didn't know which was stronger. She thought of her father. How proud he would have been to see her finally sharing her gift with the world. She thought of her mother and her brother, who always told her she was meant for more. By morning, she knew her answer. When she called the producer back, her voice was calm but certain. "I'll do it," she said. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. Lena spent every spare moment practicing. The studio let her use their piano in the evenings after work. She practiced until her fingers ached, working on the same pieces again and again. She didn't want to be perfect, she just wanted to be honest through her music. Sometimes other musicians in the studio stopped to listen. One of them said softly, "You don't just play notes, you tell a story." Lena smiled at that. Maybe that was the secret. Not just playing, but feeling. As the concert day drew near, the nerves returned stronger than ever. The producer reassured her. "Just be yourself," he said. "That's all you need." On the day of the performance, the venue glowed with warm lights and soft music. Guests arrived in elegant clothes, chatting excitedly. Lena waited backstage, her hands cold, her heart racing. She wore a simple blue dress and a small pendant that belonged to her father. She touched it gently for courage. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage. The crowd clapped politely at first, not knowing what to expect. The spotlight felt blinding, but as she sat down at the piano, something inside her settled. The world faded until it was just her and the keys. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes floated softly into the air like a whisper. Then the melody grew, filling the room with warmth and emotion. She played as if she were speaking directly to each person there, sharing her memories, her pain, her hope. Every key carried a piece of her story. The nights she worked late, the dreams she thought she lost, the courage it took to believe again. The audience listened in silence. No one moved. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. When she reached the final note, she let it linger before lifting her hands slowly from the keys. For a moment, there was complete stillness. Then came the sound, thunderous applause that filled the hall. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some had tears in their eyes. Lena stood up, overwhelmed. She gave a small bow, her smile trembling. She couldn't believe it. All her fears, all her doubts, they melted away in that moment. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was an artist. She was someone who had something to give. Backstage, the producer hugged her lightly. You did it, he said, his voice full of pride. That was more than music, Lena, that was heart. She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. I was so scared, she admitted. He smiled. That's how you know it matters. Later that night, when the crowd was gone and the hall was quiet again, Lena walked up to the piano one last time. She ran her fingers over the keys, whispering, "Thank you." She knew her journey was just beginning, but she also knew something deeper. She didn't need fame or fortune to feel fulfilled. She just needed to keep playing, to keep sharing what she loved. As she left the venue, the cool night air brushed her face. She looked up at the sky, stars glimmering faintly above the city lights. Her life had changed in ways she never imagined, but she stayed humble, grounded, and grateful. The music that once lived quietly inside her now had a place in the world, and so did she. The final note lingered in the air like a fragile whisper before fading into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The clinking of glasses, the soft rustle of conversation, even the distant hum of the kitchen, all had vanished. Every eye in the grand ballroom was fixed on the young waitress at the piano, her hands still trembling over the keys. Then, it happened. One person started to clap. Another joined in, and before long the entire room erupted in applause. The sound filled the space like thunder. Guests stood from their tables, some cheering, others simply staring in disbelief at the sight before them. The girl blinked in shock, unsure if she was dreaming. She had played that song so many times alone, late at night when no one was around, but never like this. Never in front of people who wore expensive clothes and spoke in soft, polished tones. Yet somehow her music had reached them. The hotel manager, who had been pacing nervously minutes before, now stood frozen near the bar. His expression shifted from confusion to awe. He clapped his hands together and gave a half smile that seemed to say, "I can't believe this just happened." When the applause finally began to settle, an older man from one of the front tables slowly rose. He was tall, with silver hair and a calm presence that made people turn toward him instinctively. The crowd quieted as he approached the piano. "That was extraordinary," he said softly, his voice steady but warm. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl swallowed hard. "I didn't really learn," she said. "I used to practice on an old piano at home. I just love playing." The man smiled, studying her face. "Love?" he repeated, nodding slightly. Yes, that's what it sounded like. People around them murmured in agreement. Some guests were still wiping tears from their eyes. A woman near the back whispered. It felt like she was telling a story without words. The girl stood awkwardly, her cheeks flushed. She didn't know what to do next. She wanted to sink back into her role as a waitress, disappear into the background. But there was no hiding now. Someone shouted from a nearby table, "Play another one." The room cheered in agreement. The hotel manager hesitated but then nodded at her as if giving permission. "Go ahead," he said quietly, still amazed. Her fingers returned to the keys and once again the sound filled the ballroom. This time she felt no fear. She wasn't thinking about who was watching or whether she belonged there. She was simply part of the music. Each note flowed naturally, carrying her emotions, her struggles, her quiet hopes, her years of being unseen. When she finished, the applause returned, louder than before. Guests rose to their feet. A few came forward, offering kind words, shaking her hand, or simply smiling with genuine admiration. She felt overwhelmed, unsure how to respond. Among the guests who approached her was the silver-haired man from earlier. "My name's Daniel," he said, handing her a simple business card. "I produce classical concerts. I've heard countless pianists, but what you played tonight, it wasn't just skill, it was truth. You have something special." She stared at the card, unable to find words. "Thank you," she finally whispered. He nodded. "I mean it. If you ever want to take this further, call me." Before she could say anything else, he gave her a small nod and walked back toward his table. She looked down at the card again, almost afraid to believe it was real. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Guests continued to congratulate her. Even the chef came out from the kitchen, shaking his head in disbelief. "You've just made this place famous," he joked. Later that night, after everyone had left, she sat alone by the piano. The lights were dim, and the air carried the faint scent of flowers and candle wax. Her uniform still smelled faintly of food and cleaning products, but she didn't care. She traced her fingers along the keys one last time. The hotel manager walked over, his voice unusually gentle. "You did something amazing tonight," he said. "You gave these people something they didn't expect." "I'm proud of you," she smiled a little shyly. "Thank you for letting me play." He shook his head. "No, thank you for reminding us what real talent looks like." When she left the ballroom, the night air felt cool against her face. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and she walked home with the card still clutched in her hand. Every step felt lighter, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. As she reached her small apartment, she placed the card on her table and stared at it for a long moment. The name, the number, it all seemed too unreal. People like her didn't get noticed. They worked hard quietly while others chased their dreams. But tonight had been different. For once she hadn't been invisible. Over the next few days, the memory of that night refused to fade. Guests who had attended the event began sharing short clips on social media. The videos spread quickly. People commented things like, "This girl plays with her soul, Miranda, you can feel every note." Others asked, "Who is she?" The hotel phone rang nonstop with people wanting to know more about the mysterious Waitress pianist. The manager eventually showed her one of the videos on his phone. "Look at this," he said, smiling. "You're all over the internet. Everyone's talking about you." She laughed nervously. "Really?" He nodded. "You've got something people can't fake. It's real, and they can feel it." At first, she didn't know what to think. It was strange seeing herself online, in that elegant ballroom, looking so calm when she had been shaking inside. But the comments touched her. Strangers from around the world were writing about how her music made them cry, how it reminded them of their own dreams. A few days later, she gathered her courage and called the number on Daniel's card. Her hands trembled as she held the phone. To her surprise, he answered right away. "I was hoping you'd call," he said. "There's an open rehearsal next week at the City Theater. I'd like you to come. No pressure, just play for a few people I know." She hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." He chuckled gently. "You're ready. You just don't believe it yet." When the call ended, she sat quietly for a long time. She had no fancy clothes, no formal training, and no idea what would happen next. But deep down she felt something shift. For years she had hidden her talent, convinced no one would ever care. Now the world was suddenly listening. That night she practiced on her old, out-of-tune keyboard at home, her fingers moving softly across the plastic keys. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The melody she played was the same one she had performed at the hotel, a song about holding on even when life felt impossible, and as she played, she smiled to herself. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't playing for tips or for escape. She was playing for a future she could finally see. The morning sun peeked through the thin curtains of her small apartment, casting a warm glow across the worn-out piano keys. The girl sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the business card lying on the table. It felt strange how a small piece of paper could hold so much possibility. She picked it up, ran her fingers over the name printed on it, and smiled faintly. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. The week that followed moved quickly. She worked her usual shifts at the hotel but noticed something different. Guests recognized her now. A few whispered and smiled as she passed, while others asked if she was the girl who played at the event. The manager treated her differently too, less strict, more respectful. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Every night after work, she practiced on her old keyboard. It wasn't perfect, the keys were stiff and a few didn't even make sound, but she didn't care. Each note helped her prepare for the invitation she had received from Daniel, the man who had heard her play at the gala. He had invited her to an open rehearsal at the City Theater, and she knew this was a chance she couldn't waste. On the morning of the rehearsal, she woke before sunrise. She ironed her cleanest shirt and wore a simple skirt. Her hands trembled as she tied her hair back. She didn't look like a musician, she thought, just a girl trying to find her place. Still, she carried hope in her heart as she boarded the bus to the city. The theater was larger than anything she had ever seen. The walls echoed softly as she entered, carrying her footsteps across the marble floor. A few people stood near the stage, talking quietly, their instruments resting beside them. They looked like professionals, confident and calm. She felt small among them. Daniel spotted her almost immediately and walked over with a warm smile. "You made it," he said kindly. She nodded. "I did." "Good," he said. We're just rehearsing for a small showcase tonight. I want you to play one piece, whatever you're most comfortable with. Her heart skipped. Tonight? Yes, he replied. It's not a formal concert, just a gathering of people who love music. Think of it as practice for something bigger. She took a deep breath and nodded again. All right. As the musicians began to tune their instruments, she sat at the piano, her hands shaking slightly. The theater lights felt harsh and the empty seats seemed to stare at her. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the quiet nights when she played alone. No audience, no expectations, just her and the music. Slowly, her fingers began to move. The first few notes echoed softly through the hall. Then something changed. The nerves faded, replaced by calm. Her melody filled the air with warmth and sincerity, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The violinist paused mid-tune, listening. Even Daniel stopped flipping through his notes. When she finished, silence followed again. Then came the soft sound of clapping. One of the older musicians smiled and said, "That wasn't just playing. That was feeling," her face flushed with surprise. Daniel walked up, his eyes glowing with pride. "Exactly what I told you," he said. "You don't play to impress, you play to move people. And that's what makes you special." By the evening, the small theater began to fill with guests. Most were friends of Daniel's, music lovers, teachers, and students. The girl waited backstage, her heart beating faster with every sound from the audience. When her turn came, she walked to the piano slowly, her palms sweaty. The lights were bright, but the silence felt familiar now. She began to play the same song she had performed at the hotel. But this time it sounded different. Softer yet stronger. There was confidence in every touch of the keys and emotion in every pause. The room seemed to hold its breath, every listener caught in her rhythm. When she played the final note, the crowd erupted in applause. A few even stood to cheer. She looked up, startled, and for a moment tears welled in her eyes. She bowed her head slightly, unable to stop smiling. After the performance, people came to speak with her. A local music teacher offered her lessons at no charge. A small cafe owner asked if she would perform at their evening events. Even a journalist approached, wanting to write about her story, the waitress who stunned everyone with her piano. Daniel stayed nearby, watching proudly. When the crowd began to thin, he approached her. "You did beautifully," he said. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I was so nervous," he smiled. "That's good. It means you care. Keep that and you'll go far." She laughed quietly, grateful for his kindness. "I still can't believe any of this is happening." "Believe it," he said simply. "You've earned it." That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets, the air felt different. The city lights shimmered and the world seemed a little brighter. For the first time, she didn't feel like just a waitress trying to survive. She felt like someone chasing something real. In the days that followed, her life began to change. She received calls from people she had never met, musicians, teachers, and reporters. The hotel became busier too, with guests asking about the girl who played the piano. The manager even arranged for her to perform on weekends for visitors, offering her a small bonus each time. Her performances drew larger crowds with every passing week. People came to hear not just her music but her story, the quiet waitress who had dared to take a seat at the grand piano. And every time she played, she felt that same spark, that same sense of belonging she had thought she'd lost forever. One afternoon, as she finished her set, a woman approached her carrying a camera. "I'm from a local magazine," she said. "We'd love to feature you in our next issue. People love stories like yours." The girl hesitated. "I don't know if I'm interesting enough for that." The woman laughed. "Are you kidding? You're an inspiration. People need to see what passion can do." The story was published the following month, and soon, more opportunities appeared. Invitations to small events, interviews, even a request to perform at a charity concert. Each time she accepted with humble gratitude, never forgetting where she came from. Her mother, who lived in another town, called her after reading one of the articles. Her voice trembled with pride. "I always knew you had something special," she said. "Your father would be so proud if he could see you now." Tears filled her eyes. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered. "I just hope I can make people feel something when I play." "You already do," her mother replied softly. Months passed, and her name began to appear more often in local papers. She still worked at the hotel part-time, but music had become her main focus. She practiced every day, studying techniques, learning new songs, and even writing her own pieces. Her small apartment no longer felt empty. It was filled with melodies and dreams. One evening, as she sat by the window, she thought back to the night everything began. The gala, the broken piano arrangement, the nervousness she'd felt before touching those keys. It seemed so far away, yet that moment had changed everything. Sometimes she still visited the hotel ballroom late at night when no one was around. The staff didn't mind anymore. They even encouraged it. She would sit at the piano, close her eyes, and let her fingers wander. The sound would drift softly through the empty room, echoing the same feeling that had carried her from that first uncertain note to where she stood now. And every time she played, she reminded herself that dreams don't fade because of circumstance. They only wait for courage to wake them again. The night of her first official concert arrived quietly, but for her it felt like the beginning of a new life. The theater wasn't as grand as the one from her dreams, yet it was beautiful. Warm lights, soft seats, and an audience that had come just to hear her play. She stood backstage, her heart beating fast. Her hands were slightly cold and she rubbed them together, trying to calm herself. Months of small performances, interviews, and kind words had led to this moment. She was no longer the unnoticed waitress cleaning tables in the corner of a ballroom. Tonight she was a pianist, not by title or training, but by truth, because she played from her heart. When the stage manager called her name, she stepped forward. The soft sound of applause met her ears. She looked out and saw faces filled with anticipation. Some were familiar. Her mother sat in the front row, smiling proudly. Others were strangers who had followed her story online, drawn by the emotion in her music. For a second, it all felt unreal. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. The lights dimmed and the world seemed to hold its breath. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes were gentle, almost hesitant, but soon they grew stronger. Each sound carried a piece of her journey. The nights she cried quietly after long shifts, the fear of being forgotten, the courage to try anyway. Her music wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that honesty filled the room like warmth spreading through winter air. The audience sat still, not wanting to miss a single note. Some leaned forward in their seats, others closed their eyes. There was something different about her music. It wasn't just about melody or skill. It was about feeling, about telling a story without using words. And everyone could feel it. When she reached the middle of the piece, her eyes opened. She glanced briefly at the audience, her mother, the lights. For a moment, she wasn't afraid anymore. She smiled softly and played on, her hands moving with quiet confidence. As the final note faded into silence, the room stayed still. Then came the sound she would never forget, the eruption of applause rising higher and louder, echoing across the theater. People stood to their feet, cheering and clapping, some with tears in their eyes. She stood slowly, bowing deeply, her heart full. Backstage, she could still hear the applause ringing. Daniel met her there, smiling from ear to ear. "You did it," he said. "You made them feel every word you didn't say." She laughed, a little breathless. "I was so nervous." "That's what keeps you human," he replied. "Never lose that." Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they were happy ones. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. "You always believed in me." As the night went on, more people came to congratulate her. Some offered her new opportunities. Others just wanted to thank her for reminding them that dreams don't die, they wait. She stayed humble, smiling shyly, grateful for every word. Later that night, when the theater had emptied and the lights were dimmed, she returned to the stage alone. The piano stood quietly, its surface glowing under the soft light. She sat once more, her fingers resting on the keys. "This," she whispered to herself, "is where I belong." She played a short melody, soft and peaceful, letting it echo through the empty space. Every note felt like a conversation with her past self, the girl who once watched from the sidelines, afraid to be seen. That girl had found her place now. Over the next few months, her life continued to grow in ways she never expected. She was invited to perform in different cities, each concert drawing more people than the last. Her story spread beyond the internet. Newspapers and TV shows shared her journey from a hotel waitress to a pianist who touched hearts. But through it all, she stayed grounded. She still visited the hotel sometimes. The staff greeted her warmly, proud of how far she had come. The manager always smiled when he saw her. "You'll always have a place here," he said once. "You reminded us what passion looks like." One evening, she visited the ballroom where it all began. It was quiet, just like that night months ago. The same grand piano sat near the corner, gleaming under soft golden lights. She walked toward it slowly, running her hand along the polished wood. Memories flooded back, the nervous laughter, the first note, the silence that followed. It was here she had taken her first step toward everything that came after. She sat down and began to play again, not for an audience, but for herself. The melody floated gently through the empty hall, soft and full of peace. Halfway through, the hotel manager peeked in and smiled. "Still the same magic," he said quietly before leaving her to her music. She smiled, knowing that what mattered most hadn't changed. It wasn't about fame or attention, it was about connection. Every time she played, she remembered the people who had encouraged her, the ones who had listened when no one else did. That was what kept her going. Months turned into a year, and her name became known among music circles. She was invited to collaborate with orchestras, perform at festivals, and even compose her own pieces. Still, she never forgot where it began. She often spoke about that night at the hotel when everything changed. Not because she was discovered, but because she discovered herself. In interviews, when people asked her what inspired her music, she always said the same thing: real life. The quiet moments, the struggles, the hope, that's where the music lives. Her performances grew deeper with time. Audiences said they could feel her heart in every song. Some wrote letters after her shows, telling her how her story had inspired them to chase their own dreams. She read each one carefully, often smiling to herself late at night. One afternoon, while preparing for another performance, she found herself standing before a mirror. For a long time, she studied her reflection, not with pride, but with quiet gratitude. She thought of the waitress who once wiped tables and watched others shine. Now she was standing on her own stage, not because life had been easy, but because she hadn't given up. That evening, she played again to a packed audience. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt something familiar: the calm, the emotion, the truth. The same feeling she had when she first played at the hotel. It reminded her that no matter how far she went, the heart of her music would always come from the same place: simplicity, sincerity, and hope. After the concert, a young girl approached her shyly. "Your music made me want to learn piano," she said. "I thought dreams like that were only for rich people, but now I think maybe I can too." She bent down, smiling warmly. "You absolutely can," she said. "All you need is love for it. The rest will follow." The girl's eyes sparkled as she nodded, and in that moment the pianist realized that her story had come full circle. She had gone from a dreamer to someone who inspired others to dream. That night she walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights. The city was quiet, the wind cool against her face. She thought about how far she had come, and how everything had started with one small moment of courage. When she reached her apartment, she placed her hand on her old keyboard, the one with a few broken keys. It had been her companion through all the difficult days. She sat down and began to play one more time, smiling softly to herself. Each note carried gratitude for the people who believed in her, for the struggles that made her strong, and for the music that had always been her truest voice. And as the melody filled the room, she realized something simple but powerful. Dreams don't come true all at once. They grow quietly, note by note, in the hearts of those brave enough to keep playing, even when no one is listening.